Just a second for me. Trying to hang on just a sec. Okay, it looks like it is recording. Hi, and Merry Christmas from us at Hollywood Kitchen. Today, I have a very special Christmas episode to share with all of you, and I'd like you to welcome my special guest, all the way from North Carolina, Lora Stocker. She is an artist, a graphic designer, does freelance work for Turner Classic Movies, and is on the board of the Ava Gardner Museum. Welcome, Lora.
Hi, Carrie. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Thank you for joining me. And so the museum actually has multiple Ava Gardner recipes, right?
Yes, we have a very close relationship with the Gardner family. And in the past, the museum has actually produced a cookbook that had family recipes, recipes contributed by nieces and nephews, extended family, and from fans and advocates and supporters of the museum, and also just a few recipes sprinkled in from Ava's own cookbooks, which we have a large collection of her personal library, which is quite extensive, all sorts of books and books based on her films and everything like that, but also several cookbooks. So this was an interesting recipe because last year the museum got a collections manager to join the team, and she was working on reorganizing the digital archives of the museum, and she found this particular recipe in our records, and we didn't really know the provenance of it, so we've had fun kind of digging into that over the last couple weeks, what you and I connected and talked about featuring an Ava Gardner recipe. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with everybody and kind of telling a little bit of the history of what we found out so far about this particular recipe.
Excellent. Before we get started, usually what I do with most of my guests is kind of ask like how they first discovered the star, like how you first discovered the work of Ava, and what is your favorite Ava Gardner film?
Oh, well, it changes all the time, but I'll say, first of all, how I discovered Ava. I feel like I was groomed from the womb, basically, to be a classic film fan. When I was a little girl, when I was an infant, my mom used to sing to me at night when I was going to bed, and one of the songs she liked to sing was "Can't Help Loving That Man of Mine," which is, when you listen to the lyrics today, it's kind of an unusual lullaby for a child, but she loved that song. And when I was prepping to do this with you, I was trying to think, I'd watched some of your other episodes and thought about this question because I knew you asked it and thought, well, what was my first memory of Ava? And I can't get much earlier than that, being in the crib and hearing that song. And when I was little, I always loved history, and I took to classic films very early, and loved spending time with my grandmother and my parents and extended family, and always was asking questions about the family history or history of where we lived in North Carolina. And Ava Gardner was someone who came up pretty early. And then I made the connection with the song and saw the movie and all that sort of stuff. So she's been kind of in my consciousness for a long time, probably because of her roots in North Carolina. But then to kind of get older and discover her filmography and kind of the breadth of it. A lot of people kind of pigeonholed her as the sex symbol, but she made all sorts of movies. She made dramas, comedies, musicals, horror films, kind of biblical epics. She worked in television, and she had a full wide range of films that her filmography covers. Over the summer, working with the Ava Gardner Museum, we've been working on a new exhibit around Pandora and the Flying Dutchman. And that was a film I had seen in probably high school for the first time, and I liked it, but I don't know that I really got it fully. And watching it this summer and kind of watching, especially the new edition, the new beautiful Cohen production of the
4K.
of the remastered 4K is just fantastic, and getting that Blu-ray and watching it, and I'm so smitten by this movie. So right now, just because it's kind of been my movie of 2020, that's my favorite.
Shortly before the pandemic, they did a theatrical release of the 4K of Pandora and the Flying Dutchman, and my friend April and I went. And when we were talking about going, it was opening on a Friday, and driving from one end of LA to the other on a Friday night is a really long and complicated situation. But we decided that we're just going to do this. It's Ava. We have to. And so we got all dolled up, head to toe, the hair, the makeup, the jewelry. We went out to dinner. We just felt that we wanted to pay tribute, you know, and the print was so stunning. And we looked at each other and we were like, that was so worth the hour we just spent in traffic. It was 100% worth it.
Well, I'm jealous. We were hoping to do a screening event in conjunction at the museum, but of course 2020, you know, has been what 2020 is. And it's just been a challenge for all of us, but we've powered through it and still focused on doing the exhibit. And I got my Blu-ray as soon as it was available, and I've watched it countless times. And it's one of those that you just keep seeing something new every time. And I think when you look at that film in particular and know that it was made by so many people who had a strong affinity for art and the symbolism and the meaning and the layered elements of a painting, you see that in that movie. And it's like every time I see it, it's like, oh, look what they did with the costumes. Oh, look at that thing in the background, and all of these things that I'm constantly, you know, telling my friends like, oh my gosh, I noticed this time. I didn't see that before. So that's one of the things I really love about it, is that it feels there's always something new to catch in it. And of course her performance, and I don't know if she was ever more beautiful, as beautiful as she was. That movie just really captures kind of the things that, you know, made people wild about her in her lifetime.
Well, like a lot of these stars, I sort of saw the image before I saw the films and knew more about them. And I think with actresses like Marilyn Monroe or Ava Gardner, the beauty is kind of, as we talked about, the first thing people notice. And I remember growing up seeing pictures of her, and of course, you know, you're just fascinated. And then hearing about the personal life, that kind of also, you know, you hear about the tumultuous marriages and Frank Sinatra and all of that. But then in film school, I remember seeing The Killers. And that was such a breakthrough role for Ava Gardner. I remember, like, probably everybody else when that film came out thinking, who's that? My God. And she did in that movie, more than holds her own against Burt Lancaster and everybody else. And that was sort of my Ava Gardner gateway, really, with The Killers. And then I thought, well, I got to see more, you know. And yeah, she doesn't disappoint. And I think so many of the really extraordinarily beautiful women, and sometimes men too, they sort of got pigeonholed, or they weren't taken as seriously as actors. They were sort of just treated like they're just beautiful mannequins who appear in movies. And I don't think they got nearly as much respect artistically as they deserved. And there's just so much more to Ava than is right there on the surface, you know?
Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, the more you kind of watch her films and revisit them, there's something almost very modern about her interpretation of characters. And, you know, she was so natural in so many ways. And the word that constantly gets kind of used to describe her is earthy, which I think is an accurate description, because there is this kind of just, you sense the natural passion that she had for life, that zest for life of just kind of taking it all in and taking it for the fullest, you know, that she could get it, in everything that she took on in her personal life. But you see that in her characters and the way she interprets the roles she took on, even the small ones. You know, in Showboat, she's only on screen for about 30 minutes, but she really commands in that movie. And, you know, in something like 7 Days in May, was one that I recently revisited working on something for the museum. And that's another one where she's only in 3 scenes, but man, does she just really kind of, you know, her character lingers long after she's off the screen. And I think that's a kind of a common thread through her body of work, especially as she matured as an actress.
I definitely agree. So let's talk about the recipe. We are going to make Ava Gardner's holiday cheese ball.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me how we landed on this particular recipe.
How did we land on this? So, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, the museum does have quite a lot of recipes, and perhaps we can do a follow-up episode at some point and make fried chicken one of the cake recipes or something like that were handed down from her siblings and her mother, her mother was a fantastic cook, and everybody in the family raves about the cooking prowess of Mama Gardner. But this particular recipe was one that we know was written in her hand. So that was kind of unique in terms of the recipes that the museum has access to or has copies of or we have in our digital archives. This particular one, as I mentioned when I shared it with you previously, we were discussing which ones to cook. We didn't know the full provenance of it, kind of where it came from, how did the museum get a digital copy of it and have it in our archives. So we did some digging, and we found out that the recipe was actually originally in the, belonged to or had been sort of passed down to Ava's sister, her closest sister in age, Myra, who lived in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And Myra had either, I don't know if she sold or bequeathed this recipe to a really devoted Ava Gardner fan who has a good, who's still around and has a wonderful relationship with the museum. And then he passed it on to another Ava fan. So it's one that we had, at some point, those collectors brought pieces of their collection to the museum, and we were able to scan and document them so we knew where these artifacts came from. And that's where this one originally, how it originally got into our digital archives. And it was on, so this is the handwritten recipe, and we can show a picture of it later. This is a copy. I made this little simulation of it, but it was on the back of this little illustration of Ava, which we don't know, we're still searching to find out more details about this piece, but apparently it was on like a 5x7 note card. And Ava was well known for writing information, important dates, little tidbits or thoughts down on scrap pieces of paper. So when we amassed various pieces through the years, like various pieces from her library or other little scrapbooks or notebooks, we would find little pieces of paper tucked with little notes. And sometimes those notes would be, you know, the day that something significant happened, or they would be little pieces of paper that one of the directors or one of her cast member co-stars signed or something like that. And she would either put them in a scrapbook or just have these loose pieces of paper. So this was part of kind of just a collection of loose pieces of paper, and it happened to have this recipe on the back. So when the museum's collections manager found it last year, we thought, well, that would be a fun thing to share during the holidays. So we shared it on the blog, and it got a very good response. And so that's why we landed on this one, because we know it's in her hand, and we know that it was a recipe that she really enjoyed making, and apparently kind of shared it with other family members. And apparently I learned today that the Gardner women really loved Roquefort cheese. They love to use it, and they've used it in tons of recipes. So, so I'm interested to try it and see how it tastes.
Well, I was unable to find Roquefort cheese, so there must be some Roquefort cheese fans here in Los Angeles too, because I went to 2 stores and they were out. So I'm gonna have to use blue cheese for mine. By the way, can you hear me okay? Because my landlord has the gardeners outside, and they weren't supposed to be here till later today, and now there's all this noise out there. So I hope you can.
I can hear you okay. Yeah.
You can hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I hope the video doesn't have tons of noise in the background. Okay. So I have never made a cheese ball before. This is a first for me. So how did we get started doing this?
So, you know, you and I've done a little prep work. We both, the recipe, I don't know if we want to go over the ingredients.
Let's go over the ingredients, sure.
Okay. So, so it's a pretty simple cheese ball. You know, the base of it is cream cheese. So that's, you know, it did recommend that all of the cheeses be set out, you know, at least a couple of hours before making this, so they're soft and easy to mix. But it requires cream cheese, Roquefort cheese, but if you can't use Roquefort, you can use blue or some other variation, gorgonzola, something like that, a soft sort of tangy cheese.
You said 5 ounces, right?
What's that?
5 ounces, right?
Mm-hmm. And then cheddar. And it's very vague, whether it's shredded cheddar or a block of cheddar that you've shredded, or if you use a cheese spread. I've made this one other time. I made it over Thanksgiving for my husband, and I didn't have any like spreadable cheddar, so I used shredded cheddar and just chopped it up really fine. And that worked well, but today I'm going to try using spreadable cheddar, and we'll see how that goes. And then it requires some Worcestershire walnuts that are chopped and that are pre-soaked in either port wine or sherry. So it's a matter of either what you have or what you prefer. So it didn't say this in the recipe, but you and I were talking earlier, and kind of best practice is to go ahead and the first thing you do is to chop the walnuts and soak them. So that way they can try and absorb as much of the port flavor or sherry flavor as they can.
Okay, so, I got mine done already, so they've been soaking in sherry for a while.
Soaking as we speak. So yeah, it's pretty much just once everything's softened, you just kind of throw it all in a bowl and start mixing.
Okay.
So.
You know, I could, believe it or not, I could not find a spreadable cheddar at the store today. I think someone must have ransacked the cheese section at my local grocery store before I got there. It was highly frustrating. I'm going to be right back. I'm going to get a bigger bowl. I'll be right back.
Okay, sounds good. I'm going to just be dumping all of my ingredients in my mixing bowl.
Okay, so I dump all the ingredients in my bigger bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't dump the walnuts though, right?
It says, it recommends to mix the cheeses first and then go back. Once you've done that, then pour in some of the nuts and mix those in. When I made this over the Thanksgiving holiday, I was kind of like you. My grocery store just didn't have anything I needed. So I didn't have the Roquefort, and I didn't have, they were all out of walnuts. So I substituted chopped pecans. And so I think you can kind of substitute your nut of preference.
Mixing all my cheeses here.
I will say, when I made it over the holiday, I used 5 ounces of blue. It was very blue cheesy. So if you like, if you like that flavor, you know, keep it that amount. But if that's a little strong for you, maybe use a little less.
Okay.
Again, just kind of adapting it to your own preferences or those of who you're going to be serving it to. So how have you made it your whole life and never made a cheese ball?
I know, right? Well, it's funny. I really am not a cook, even though I've kind of collected these star recipes. I'm kind of the person who orders takeout or eats at a friend's house or something. But the pandemic has kind of forced my hand in a lot of ways, and I've had to really kind of learn how to cook and learn how to do certain things. And yeah, this is the first cheese ball I've ever made. Now, here's my question, I guess, is how do I get it formed into a ball? Do I just stick my hands in here, or?
I've got a little trick that I'll show you that I was telling you before we started our video that I grew up, my parents owned their own business, and we used to cater a lot. They owned a florist, and we would cater some of the weddings that we did the flowers for and that sort of thing. And I was in charge of the cheese ball. So I picked up a little trick that made it easier and made it less messy, so you didn't have cream cheese all in your hands. And it'll involve using a little bit of either parchment paper or wax paper if you have it, and some tinfoil.
When do I add the Worcester sauce?
So once you mix everything in and get the cheese kind of mixed together, then you'll add in the Worcestershire sauce.
And just 1 tablespoon.
I think it said a dash.
Yeah.
So again, kind of to your preferences.
Okay.
I like Worcestershire, so I might go a little extra.
Yeah, I kind of do too, actually.
Yes. And I think I mentioned this to you in my email, or when we were messaging each other, that in my sample, I tried it with a bunch of different crackers and tried to see what I thought tasted best. And I ended up adding a little bit of black pepper into it.
Oh, okay.
Give it a little more, I don't know, a little more heat. And I think I'm going to do that again this time.
Okay.
So I've got my handy pepper here. So you're going to hear that for a second. That's not the yard crew, but that you're.
Like whenever I do these, no matter when I schedule them, it happens to be when the yard crew's outside, and I'm just like, oh.
Well, it was very windy here earlier, and where I'm filming this in my dining room, and my wind chimes were going crazy outside, and I thought, oh my goodness, when we film this, you're just going to hear wind chimes constantly.
I figured these little things maybe add to the charm of the.
That's right. And a little more pepper to mine.
Okay.
Okay. So once you have the cheese and Worcestershire all mixed, that's when you'll add in your wet walnuts.
Okay.
And you need to reserve some of them for for rolling them on. I'm sorry I didn't say that, but if you didn't, that's fine. We'll just do it.
Some of them out. Hang on.
It's about half in and half used to roll. If you can if you can get them out of the bowl.
All right. Well, I'm just gonna do the best I can.
You are. First cheese ball, you got this.
Yeah, that's right.
So I didn't soak my walnuts as long as I did my pecans at my first making of this, so I hope they'll still have that strong port flavor. And are you doing yours in port wine or sherry?
I have sherry cooking wine, so that's actually what I used for mine. Okay. All right, I've got the cheese stirred up. I've got the walnuts in there.
Okay. I'm just a little bit behind you, so give me just 1 second.
Sure.
So you're just going to have all kinds of wonderful recipes for parties when we can all get back together again, aren't you?
Right? Yeah, I'm going to have a whole new skill set of stuff I know how to make.
Everybody's going to invite you over and you're to potlucks.
Well, originally I wanted this to be kind of like a dinner party type scenario where we get a bunch of film fans and sit around a table together and eat the food and talk about the stars. So hopefully I can reshoot these post-pandemic and I'll know how to make things and we can do this.
Okay, so you've got everything mixed. I've got mine mixed. So here's a little trick. I would say if you have, do you have some tin foil or parchment paper?
I've got some wax paper and parchment. Let me go grab it. Okay, I have wax paper and I have parchment paper.
Right. So I would say cut you a large enough piece of wax paper or tin foil or parchment paper, whatever you have.
Okay.
To put your cheese ball in it. And what I like to do is take the ball, the ingredients, pour it out, and then use the paper to kind of help you make your ball. And then you can put that in your fridge or freezer to kind of cool, to set. And then once it's set, you bring it out of the fridge and roll your nuts, the nuts around it that are left.
This is good to know because I had this vision of me sitting here with my bare hands shaping this lump of cheese, which I feared would be an epic mess.
Well, it's especially hard when the cheese is, you've gotten your cheese to room temperature so it can be mixed. It would be impossible to hold its shape in this current state.
Okay, so does this look like enough of a ball?
Yeah, I think so. So I would say just once you've done that, kind of take your paper, get it like you want it. And you could also make it a log or any other shape that doesn't have to be a ball per se.
Okay. And then I just put it in the refrigerator and let it set.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, why don't I will set this aside for refrigeration, and we can just sit here now and talk about Ava.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to step and just set this in my fridge. So it'll fit, maybe even in my freezer, since we're doing this, a quick version of this.
Okay.
And I'll be right back.
I'll be right back too. All right, now time to deep dive into all things Ava.
All things Ava. Let me just get the remainder of cream cheese off my fingers. So I loved your story about visiting the Ava Gardner Museum in your episode with Annette. I'd love to hear more about your experience visiting the museum and your impressions of it and all that.
Yeah, well, my whole family lives in Georgia, and a lot of times at Christmas, we don't do a lot of presents. Instead we do like a family trip or a family outing because it's kind of more about creating experiences and memories and stuff. And I think it was Christmas like 2003. It was a long time ago. We did a road trip up the East Coast, and the goal was to spend Christmas in Williamsburg, Virginia, which we did. My mom and dad are real into history, so we went to the colonial settlement and looked all over at all the historical stuff in Virginia. And on the way up, I was in the backseat of the car, like sleeping, and I wake up, I look up, and I just see this giant sign, Ava Gardner Museum, next exit. I'm like, Dad! And my parents are like, game over, we have to do it, we know how Carrie is. So my parents pulled over, and it was like sleeting, it was icy, it was, and I think my dad and brother stayed in the car, but my mom went in with me, and we got to see the museum, and it was really awesome. It was just such a little treasure there. Mm-hmm. And I just remember thinking how tiny she was. I mean, the waist on those gowns looked so little, and she looked so small when you looked at the clothes. And when you see her on the big screen, of course, she looks just so much larger than life. So it's kind of a mental disconnect to think about the big screen image and to see those clothes that are so tiny, and it was really interesting. And I just love those kind of museums because I think that it's so interesting to keep a star's memory alive, their legacy alive, and certainly for small towns too in America and beyond. If they had a big influential famous person maybe come from that town, they sort of loom large over that town, over that area, in fact. So it's it's a huge part of that history, and I was really excited to see the museum, and I hope to come back. It's definitely on my post-pandemic to-do list.
Well, you have a place to stay. You can stay with me, and I live about 10 minutes from it, so I'm very close. And when you went, did you also visit her gravesite or drive by her birthplace or anything like that?
Actually, we didn't have a chance because it was really sleeting and cold, and I felt like I'd already conned them into pulling over so I could see it. I didn't want to push my luck and demand we do all these other things. So we didn't get the chance to see the gravesite or the birthplace, but that's on my post-pandemic to-do list. So I definitely want to I didn't think digital cameras existed at the time I went, so I don't even know if I have any pictures. So I'm definitely very eager for a return visit.
Yeah. Well, I'm the same way with you. I mean, I love I love history, like your parents, and probably like you do as well. And I love to travel. And whenever I go places with friends or family, I always try to see if there's any kind of Hollywood-related site or person from that area, and going to see, you know, like a museum for like the cowboy singer Rex Allen, or going to see the Laurel and Hardy Museum. In North Carolina, we also, of course, we have another very famous citizen, Andy Griffith, was from North Carolina. And his hometown of Mount Airy has a wonderful museum that talks primarily about his television career, but also about his film career. And you can actually stay in his birthplace. You can spend the night there and rent it. And the whole town has fully embraced the Mayberry identity. And they have, you know, Floyd's Barbershop and the Snappy Lunch and all these little places that speak to the show. So like you said, a small town or a rural community can really embrace the history of a famous resident or citizen, and take that and really do it justice. And that's one of the things that's so special about the Ava Gardner Museum. I've been to a lot of, like I said, a lot of those kinds of museums or sites in my travels over the years. And what makes the Ava Gardner Museum really special is that it's both a museum from a fan perspective, because it was started by a husband and wife who were sort of early super fans, and they collected ephemera and costumes and posters and all sorts of artifacts in Ava's lifetime. And then you have it merge with other artifacts from Ava's personal life and family. So it's really unique that it shows kind of not just the kind of fan perspective of a star, but also their upbringing, their roots, their connections to home, and their extended family, and what that family meant to them, and how that kind of helped define their story and their path. And that's what's really been special, to kind of be involved with the museum and learn more about her story, and how loyal she was, and what a great friend she was, and a great family member. And she just, you know, and she loved North Carolina. And, you know, I'm born and raised from North Carolina, as my accent shows. You can tell by that. And I've always loved the history of North Carolina, and trying to learn more about it, and various citizens and stars and musicians and things that have roots here or connections here, and can't get much bigger than, you know, Ava Gardner. So I've been very, very lucky to be involved with the museum, and very proud of the work that the museum's been doing.
Excellent. So what do you think? There's so much to unpack when talking about Ava. Oh my gosh. So she really didn't need to become an actress. Like, she was just so arrestingly beautiful. That was Bappy's, her sister Bappy's boyfriend or husband, right? That took a photograph of Ava, put it in his store in New York, and that's how she got discovered by MGM.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very much a story out of Hollywood, but it's totally true, which is really neat. She was in between high school and college, and she went up to visit her older sister, Bappy. Her name was Beatrice, her nickname was Bappy. And Bappy had just married a photographer named Larry Tarr, who had a series of photography studios in the city. And when Ava came to visit, before she had enrolled in secretarial courses at a North Carolina college called Atlantic Christian College. It's now Barton College in Wilson, North Carolina. And she was going to enter the secretarial program, and that was her plan. She was going to be a secretary and live somewhere probably in North Carolina and stay close to home, and that was going to be her life. But she went to visit her sister, and while there at visiting them, the photographer, brother-in-law Larry Tarr, said, "Let's take your picture." So he took a multitude of photos of her in several poses, and her with Bappy, and they're beautiful photos. And she's wearing a really neat little dress in it. It almost looks like it's got polka dots, but they're kind of like little smiley faces. It's really interesting when you really zoom in and look at it. But there was one particular photo where she wore this sort of slightly oversized straw hat with ribbon that was kind of Gone with the Windish. And that was it was just clear that that was a really stunning photo. And he and Bappy both thought it was beautiful, and they put it in the window. And there was a young man who worked as like a clerk, I believe, with Lowe's Theaters. and he passed by and saw it. And he called the photography studio and tried to get her number and pretended to be an MGM scout, but he wasn't. And they didn't give out Ava's number because he wanted to take her out on a date. But once that idea kind of was brought to Larry and Bappy's attention, they were like, gosh, we should submit her photo. So they sent it in to MGM, and they saw it and thought, gosh, she is really striking. Let's call her in for a test. So Ava had come back to North Carolina. She was taking her secretarial classes at Atlantic Christian College. And then she got back on a bus and went back up to New York and did a test. And the person doing the test couldn't understand her because of her thick North Carolina accent. So hopefully all the guests today can understand me, and hopefully you can as well, Carrie.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, they couldn't understand her, so they ended up doing a silent test. And that silent test is what got her a 7-year contract. So, and then and her mom didn't want her to go to Hollywood alone. So they said, well, you need a chaperone. And Bappy said, I'll go. So Bappy was right there with her, and they got on the train and headed to Hollywood.
Now, one thing I also wanted to talk about was sort of the star-making process, because when they got Ava to MGM, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were trying to change her. They were trying to work even on her appearance, which I find amazing that anyone would want to mess with perfection there. And pardon?
It's unbelievable that they would want to change a hair on her head.
And also singing, dancing, acting, horse riding. I mean, they kind of put them through a gauntlet of training. So talk about how that training affected Ava, because I've kind of heard that it really kind of gave her an inferiority complex and was kind of a difficult thing for this young girl to just be constantly,
constantly told you've got flaws, which is crazy. When you hear, of course, the stories of Judy Garland and all that she went through and how they tried to change her and mold her into something, and the minute they let her be herself, then she became the star that she was. And Ava was sort of that way too. She had just very striking features. She had kind of, for that time period, kind of thicker eyebrows that were more distinctive, that a lot of people think of as indicative of Elizabeth Taylor, but that was very much what her eyebrows looked like. She had a dimple in her chin, and they plucked her eyebrows, filled in her chin, tried to put just gobs of makeup on her, and tried to make her look like something she wasn't. And when you catch, she worked at MGM. She had that 7-year contract when she started. And she worked for MGM 5 years until 1946, when she did Whistle Stop and The Killers, the 2 films that really, put her on the path to stardom. And you see, when you can catch her in some of those really bit roles before she's credited, you can see that she's just really kind of dolled up to the hilt, much more than she was once she became a star. Talking a little earlier about how modern I find her work now. A lot of that also is how she carries herself, the costuming, her makeup, her hairstyles, and all of that in her movies. Once she became a star, she's a lot more natural on screen. She was never, when you think of her playing Honey Bear Kelly or something like that, or certainly later, The Night of the Iguana and playing Maxine, she's very little, it almost seems like very little makeup. And it's very natural. Whatever they did was very natural, and her beauty just kind of seeps through, and it didn't need all of that, but they did try. And they put her in, you talk about the star making process. She did all the pinups you can imagine, eating ice cream cone seductively while sitting on a block of ice in a bikini or a bathing suit, skiing and all the Halloween photos and all that sort of stuff. She was put through the gauntlet of that, and all the lessons and training. But she did have she really through her whole life, she felt a sense of insecurity. And I think that does go all the way back to probably that screen test when she was told, oh, I can't understand you. So let's just have you, walk around the screen and walk around the set and not speak because we can't understand what you're saying. And then she goes to Hollywood, and it's well, your eyebrows are too thick. We don't like the dimple in your chin. You know, you need to take all these lessons and all that to be more of a proper lady and a proper star. And I think she did have that insecurity, both personally and with her acting abilities throughout her entire career and entire life. And I don't think that ever left her.
I think that's really sad, and I think that was very probably damaging to a lot of these actors and actresses who were kind of treated like they weren't good enough, and that's got to be really hard. And also, I find it so hard to believe in the early years of her MGM contract, they didn't know what to do with her. It's like, how can you not know what to do with her?
Yeah.
That would be my question.
You can do anything with, you know, that's really interesting too. You know, the MGM, and as she would say this, she would have said this in her own life, that MGM just never really knew what to do with her. And it took loaning her out. You know, she was loaned out to for Whistle Stop, and then loaned out to Universal for The Killers. And those were the two movies that, you know, wowed audiences. In fact, doing Whistle Stop is what led the producer of The Killers. He saw that and said, "Oh, she's great. We need that. She's who we want to be, Kitty Collins." And that's how she got that role. And then MGM was like, "Oh, yeah, okay, let's put her in The Hucksters with Clark Gable. Let's put her in One Touch of Venus and see what we can do with her." You know, and some of those vehicles were more kind of fitting for her, and some weren't. But nonetheless, it took them a long time to see what her talents were and how the camera just loved her. I mean, you can't look away when she's on screen. You're mesmerized.
Absolutely. And sometimes it just amazes me that they didn't know what to do with her. It's like, are you guys not trying at all? I mean, really? I noticed that seems to be a pattern too, that a lot of the actresses, they had their best roles or their best breakthroughs when they went to another studio who kind of did know what to do with them. And so The Killers and Whistle Stop were huge breakthroughs for Ava on the path to stardom. And really, sure, her biggest period, right, was like in the late 40s and early part of the 1950s. And she was so beautiful in Technicolor as well. Like, seeing Ava in Technicolor, I could just stare at that around.
Well, and it's something to think that, you know, she came to Hollywood in 41, and her first real Technicolor role was in Pandora and the Flying Dutchman 10 years later, 51. It took that long to get her in Technicolor, which is crazy. She did have a little bit part in Dewberry Was a Lady, so that sort of counts as her first color film, but still, it's just amazing. And, you know, researching Pandora and the Flying Dutchman, U.S. audiences may not know this, but it was released first in the UK, and then later that year, Showboat came out. In the US, it was the reverse. So Showboat came out first, and MGM, who had the distribution rights to Pandora, waited until Showboat came out, because that was their big film, to release Pandora. So UK audiences and other European countries got to see her first in Pandora. The US got to see her first in color in Showboat. So that's kind of a little interesting difference there. And a lot of, you know, when you read a lot of kind of film scholars and people who talk about Ava Gardner and her body of work, European audiences are a lot more prone to know Pandora and revere it than perhaps it gets revered here. I think with the release through Cohen and kind of the publicity that it's gotten, a lot of US audiences are rediscovering that film and seeing just what a masterpiece it was. I mean, it's kind of great because it's kind of like, to some, not a forgotten film, but kind of one that was overlooked, because people always think of The Killers and Showboat, Night of the Iguana, and Barefoot Contessa. Those are kind of the big ones in the US. And this one's now coming in there and kind of getting reevaluated, and people are realizing what a gem it is.
And there are some shots in Pandora, I literally gasped out loud in the theater. Like, and I wasn't the only one either. So that is really just an incredible film. And I think you're right, it has been very much overlooked. Now, even as a huge star, Ava, from what I have read and seen, didn't seem comfortable in that skin. Like, it seemed to kind of not fit in a way for her.
She, you know, early on, she actually was really more interested in being a singer. You know, she was of course studying to be a secretary, but and going to secretarial school. But she, if you had asked, you know, 18, 19-year-old Ava Gardner pre going to Hollywood, what's your dream? What if you could do anything? She wanted to be a big band singer. She loved big band music, jazz music, and that was the era in which she, you know, she came into kind of her formative years. And that was really more where her aspirations were. I think it was one of those things where it's just the cards that she was dealt. Her beauty led her down this path, and then she embraced it. She never felt like she was, you know, the insecurities were always there, and she always had that kind of second guessing herself. But I think the Killers actually helped build her confidence a lot, because the producer, Mark Hellinger, was very supportive of her and really worked with her and saw her talent, and that made her a lot more confident. And then when you look at her kind of later in life, the latter part of her career, doing something, particularly The Night of the Iguana, by the time she made that movie, you know, her family, I've heard some of her family members say in interviews that parts of that movie really captured how she was and who she was. And you can see her a lot more comfortable in her skin. And it's a very stripped down, you know, role. She's very, again, hair and makeup, very natural. It seems like what you might see her looking like in her apartment in London or something like that. But I think it did take her a long time to kind of feel comfortable in the role of actress, but I don't know if she ever fully got there, because she just had those kind of nagging insecurities a lot of her life.
Let's talk for a minute about Ava's high-profile marriages, because that's something people always want to know about.
Yeah.
And it seems to me, at least with the first two, again, this is just based on what I've read, but it just seems they wanted her for her beauty, and then once they got her, they really weren't interested in being husbands or being partners, or she was more like a trophy to be won as opposed to a real person to share their life with. And I think that seems to have happened to Rita Hayworth, Lana Turner.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think a lot of these women sort of face that problem.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. The museum, I work with the museum. I work a lot with the social media strategy. That's really where, that's how I got involved with them, volunteering and helping with their social media. And that's kind of the largest area in which I work and operate and support as a board member. And we've posted things before. We did a series of articles on the blog earlier last year about her. We did one about each marriage to kind of, you know, tell that kind of a, you know, broad, painted with a broad brush, but told kind of the stories of those romances. And when we posted things about Mickey Rooney, people just were like, how could she have ever married Mickey Rooney? What was the deal with Mickey Rooney? And it's so interesting to me, because we can look back on these stars now that they've lived their life, had their career, perhaps passed away, and we judge them differently or view them differently. But when she came to Hollywood, she met Mickey Rooney the first week she was there. She had no you know, background in being an actress, didn't know what that was going to be like. Here she, you know, had come from this experience with this screen test where her voice was, you know, not made fun of, but like, let's just keep you quiet, girl, you know, we can't understand you. And she is taking a tour of the studio, and he is filming Babes on Broadway and doing the Carmen Miranda number. And she goes onto the soundstage, having, you know, being given a tour, and she sees him, and he sees her, and he's dressed, you know, full Carmen Miranda makeup, hat, and everything, and headpiece and all, and he is blown away by her beauty, and he pursues her doggedly, and wants to date her, wants to take her out, and she refuses him quite a bit at first. And ultimately she relents, and then she goes out with him, and he sweeps her off her feet, and he's the biggest star in the world at the time. And you know, we lose the context today of what it would have been like for her at 18, 19 years old, coming from a rural community, you know, in North Carolina that was largely agrarian, and to some degree still is. and then going to this huge city and having being told you're so gorgeous, you're going to get a movie contract and be in the pictures, and then meeting the #1 star in the world and he falling mad for you. You've got to, I mean, that's a totally different thing than the context of viewing that marriage now. And you can see why she was swept up in everything that he projected. And he took her to the best nightclubs. He wined and dined her the whole time. And she fell in love with him. I think she really did love him. Sometimes there's a lot of things that get said about her that are rumors or not at all true, or and sometimes it's said that she married him to bolster her career. I don't think that was ever in her mind at all. I think she really thought she loved him, and her mom got married at 19 and she was 19 when she married him. So I think that was probably in the back of her mind, and she expected that marriage to be like the marriage that she witnessed of her parents, which was a largely happy marriage and equitable marriage. And I think that's what she expected, and then she married him, and that's not what she got. He was a womanizer, and he was young and she was young, and they didn't really know how to be married or what that meant. But I think she went into it thinking, well, this is who I'm going to marry. This is going to be forever. And it just didn't work out, but they remained friendly the rest of their lives and all of that. And the same thing happened with Artie. I think, he was blown away at her beauty. And then they had a wonderful courtship and wonderful dating period, and even lived together before they got married. And then they got married, and he started picking at her and trying to change her and make her something different. And to some degree, she gave in to that. She would say later that she valued him pushing her to seek more education, because that did kind of set off a life of being very interested in things and learning and reading and all of embracing life and all different cultures and all that. That was something that was a hallmark of her, but not that he totally made that start within her, but I think he encouraged it. Unfortunately, he did it from sort of kind of a mean place. He wasn't particularly nice. But, she loved him, and she loved him when they broke up. And then, of course, there's Frank.
That's one of the most passionate, high-profile marriages of the time. And, it's certainly the thing that most people, unfortunately, just remember her by. But it seems like that was so incredibly volatile, kind of one of those relationships where they can't live without each other, but they can't live with each other either.
Exactly. And it's really interesting, again, to kind of take yourself back and put yourself in the time in which they got together. And when they got together, she was the bigger star, and his career was waning. He had been dropped by Columbia Studio with his record label. He had been he was having issues with his career. His movies just weren't doing well, and kind of that post-war period, he was kind of getting out of favor, and he was going through the process of rediscovering himself. So he had sort of some insecurities too, that he was dealing with, and he had issues with his voice and all of that going on at that time, when things really heated up in their relationship, and they were madly in love and passionate through and through. And it was exactly as you described it. They were so much alike, and they just couldn't live with each other or live without each other. And because of that, ultimately the marriage just didn't survive. But they did stay close, and they reconciled on and off for here and there, and they stayed close for the rest of Ava's life. And she could call on him, if she needed something or was concerned about something, or needed advice, and they talked regularly. I mean, they were very much kind of forever lovers. I think that's maybe even how she described it, forever in love. And sometimes it just doesn't work out like that. You can't be with that person, but that doesn't mean you don't love them just as much as you did at the very beginning. And I think that's kind of how their relationship was.
I've always been intrigued too by the time period in her life when she just left Hollywood and lived in Spain. It was going to bullfights and kind of living this bohemian existence that had to have been very liberating for her after being sort of under the watchful eye of a movie studio for so many years.
Yeah, the kind of the roller coaster ride of her marriage to Frank Sinatra and the tabloid fodder that surrounded it, it put a lot of stress on their relationship. And when the time came that she felt she could make that move, she did. And that was really kind of remarkable for that time period to say, I'm confident enough in myself and my career, wherever it goes, I'm going to just make this move because it's the right move for me. And I think a lot of younger people that discover her work and her life story in particular, that's something that really resonates, that sense of independence, that sense of, I'm going to do this on my own, and I'm not going to be defined by these, the good and bad of these relationships. I'm not going to be defined by being a certain type of starlet. I want to be more selective in the work that I do and work really when I kind of want to or feel I need to. And I want to go and live a different kind of life. And she first visited Spain and visited Europe, actually, working on Pandora and the Flying Dutchman. That was the production that got her to visit both London and then visit Spain. And she just fell in love with both countries and spent the rest of her life, part of that time in Spain, and then the remainder of her life in London. And she came home quite a lot. She visited North Carolina and stayed very close with her family, and her family went to visit her. And she would come over to work, or she did a lot of productions in Europe the rest of her life, or, in other countries, as opposed to doing them in the US or in Hollywood. And she loved the Spanish culture. She loved the dance, the music, the food, all of that, and she just fully embraced it.
I just find her endlessly fascinating. Personal, professional, just so many different levels,
Mm-hmm.
She's
definitely somebody. Yeah, she's definitely somebody that it's like, doing work with the museum and really kind of finding topics to talk about on the blog in particular, and in some of the exhibit work that the museum's doing right now. It's really great to kind of do a deeper dive in things that are beyond. The museum's always done a great job in telling the breadth of her life and the story, but me being a new, participant with the museum and a board member, getting to be involved and learn more about her beyond the surface. That's been so rewarding and endlessly fascinating, like you said, and really great to kind of, know that this person who grew up just down the road from where I live now, lived this big, huge life, and has left this big impact that is still being felt today, like you said, in fashion, in film, and in books. And she's just endlessly just a source of inspiration, kind of, and not pigeonholed by the time in which she lived.
And there's something so timeless about her. Like, there's some stars that, based on their looks and or career and presence, they are very of their time.
Mm-hmm.
But Ava does not feel of her time. She feels classic. She feels endless. She could be a star right now, or in the 70s, or in the, at any era, she could still resonate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great. We had there's a person who runs an Instagram handle called, I'm going to get it wrong, Garland of Roses, I think. Her name is Alexandra, and she lives in England. And she is believe she's 16, and she is a big Ava fan and started this Instagram account a couple years ago and has been an Ava fan for about 2 or 3 years. She bought her autobiography and Ava, My Story, the book you have right there, and read it and just fell in love with her and found all of these ways that she connected with her life story as a 16-year-old right now. And she contributed to the blog of the museum and wrote a story about kind of what Ava means to me as a teenager. And it's so great to see how, and the name, just think of like the name Ava, that shows up in the top 10 lists of baby girl names, has for like the last decade. And, there's certainly other famous Avas out there, but lots of those people are getting that from Ava Gardner, and it's just really great. I think she would be really surprised and blown away to know how much her life and her films are still resonating with fans and audiences all over the world.
Definitely. And I always feel so touched when I meet really young people, teenagers, kids that love film history, because that just does my heart so much good to know that this stuff will live on. It's never going to die. It will be kind of immortal, really. And that new generations are going to keep falling in love with it and discovering it. And you guys run such a terrific website too, I have to say. For people that are either Ava fans or maybe want to be Ava fans, you can really do so much deep diving into the blog, and there's a lot of content there. There's a lot to discover. And I have this one, Ava Gardner, My Story. What are some other Ava Gardner books, and I know they're on the blog too, that you would recommend?
I'm glad you asked, because I have a stack right behind me.
Excellent.
So you mentioned, of course, Ava My Story. I would say any Ava fan, this is your definitive book. This is, you know, the official biography of her, and it's largely in her voice, and it's got lots of wonderful stories, and she's very, she's surprisingly candid. You know, sometimes with autobiographies, folks will be a little guarded, but she's not. She's very candid, and she's very honest of all the trials and tribulations, all of the positive things in her life, and it's a really great starter book. I would say one of the recent books that came out that I think is just fantastic is Ava, A Life in Movies. It's got just beautiful photography in it, and it does a really great job of kind of, it's just very well researched. It does a wonderful job of showing the breadth of her career and different phases, and it's got wonderful anecdotes and quotations and things from people in her orbit, co-stars, cinematographers, directors, other people that she worked with. So this is a wonderful book. And then two books that are associated with the museum that I would highly recommend is this book called Living with Miss G, which was written by Renee Jordan, who was her longtime friend and companion, and worked with her and traveled with her. And it's very much a firsthand set of stories and anecdotes about what it was like living with Ava Gardner. That's a wonderful book. And then for anybody who's coming to North Carolina and wants to learn more about her family, the history of her family, her roots in the state, and what connections she kept to North Carolina throughout her entire life, you're not going to get a book any better than this book called Grabtown Girl, which for anybody who doesn't know, the little community or crossroads where she was born in North Carolina was called Grabtown. And the house where she was born is still standing, and it's at a little intersection where you see a road sign that says Grabtown. And this is all about her long roots in North Carolina, her deep roots in North Carolina, her family roots here, and it's got wonderful anecdotes and wonderful little stories. There's a wonderful story that I love. One of the last times she came home was in 1978, I believe it was, and she came to a high school reunion. And she flew here to attend her high school reunion where they were honoring her. She flew here from Princess Caroline's wedding in Monaco. So there's these, I don't know if you've ever seen them, but there's these wonderful videos online of Ava Gardner dancing at the reception of Princess Caroline's wedding. And she's dancing with Gregory Peck, and Frank Sinatra's there, and it's just a cavalcade of classic stars. And she is the belle of the ball. She's having the most fun dancing with everybody. And to think that she left there, got on the airplane in Monaco, and flew to North Carolina to go to a high school reunion, that really tells something about her, and how important home was to her in North Carolina. So this book has that story and a bunch of other really great ones. So that's the other one I would highly recommend. And these are all available through the museum. So, you know, if you're looking for some good holiday gifts and want to support the mission of the Ava Gardner Museum, certainly visit avagardner.org and check out their store, and you can buy these and a lot of other goodies for the Ava fan or classic film fan in your life.
And also, most of her films are available on DVD, right? I can't think of any off the top of my head that aren't. Can you?
I think the kind of stuff in the latter part of her career might be a little harder to find, but for the most part, I think pretty much everything is. Like I said, except for maybe like some of the, she did a couple miniseries productions in the 80s that are a little harder to find, and those are, you know, the latter part of her career is where I'm still working to see everything. So those are the toughies, but some of them are online, and you can find them on YouTube or you can stream them. You know, it just depends. It takes a little bit of searching, but you can typically find pretty much everything in her career. So that's really great. You know, there's so many stars who their full filmography isn't available. And it's great to be able to see all 60 plus, just about be able to see all of that 60 plus productions that she did.
Yes, always tell people we are so lucky right now that there's so much content out there, because I remember as a kid, if it wasn't on TV or then eventually VHS. So today it really is at our fingertips.
Absolutely.
So should we go check on our cheese balls?
Let's check on our cheese ball.
All right. Right back.
What you think?
Well, it looks like it's done pretty well in the freezer. So I'm gonna, when we log off here, I'm gonna whip out some crackers and taste test it.
So if you have some of the nuts left over,
okay,
the recommendation is to, you know, kind of pat them on the top of it, so you can kind of have that nut topping.
Okay, I'm gonna attempt that.
I'm going to say mine is not quite cold enough, but I'm going to work with it.
All right. Well, this has been really delightful having you as my guest today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I've had the blast.
Me too. I'm thinking we need to find a lot more Ava Gardner recipes. That's what I'm thinking.
I think we do. I think we could totally continue this conversation. And any other North Carolina star, not that I only love North Carolina stars, but I have a particular big heart for those, a lot of passion for my North Carolina folks. So we'll have to see if we can find an Andy Griffith recipe,
sure,
or a Ben Vereen, or a Pam Grier. There's a lot of great actors and actresses from North Carolina. So
okay. Yeah, I love the idea of having repeat guests on the show. I think that's really fun. And you know, someone told me once, they're like, well, what if the star didn't really make this? And I said, well, some of these I do admit, I'm sure are studio publicists or whatever, but to me, it's a fun jumping off point. And that's really that, so.
Absolutely. Well, I'll say, you know, like I said, before today, I had no clue that the Gardner women loved Roquefort cheese. So you just never know what little tidbits you're going to find out.
Absolutely.
Perusing the kitchens of the classic stars. So,
and Ava was Southern, and in the South, food is very, very, very much a part of your life, your family, your bonding. It's just a huge deal.
Absolutely. Okay, mine isn't quite as pretty as I would like, but I'm going to go with it. So, what kind of cracker did you bring today?
Well, I couldn't get in Trader Joe's today because the lines were too long, but I got Ritz toasted chips. So I was going to try the Ritz cracker with this.
Nice. So when I made this over Thanksgiving, like I said, my grocery store didn't really cooperate, didn't have any of the things I wanted. I could only get saltines. So I tried it with that. And then the next, like 2 days later, I was able to go to a store and get some better crackers. I really like a wheat cracker. So I thought that these toasted wheat crackers were really good. And then these kind of like flatbread crackers. I don't know if you've ever gotten anything like, they're kind of like a Mediterranean flatbread.
Oh, yeah.
Those are really good.
Okay.
So So it's a little messy, but here's my cheese ball
Excellent.
on my little plate.
And here is mine. I'm going to put it on a nice plate in just a moment.
Beautiful, beautiful. Shall we give it a go and see how
Yeah,
I
why don't we set these together? Try these.
Okay, moment of truth.
Let me see here.
Oh. I think it's good.
When I can have people over again, I'd love to have a big dinner party and invite tons of friends over and have every single thing I serve be based on the star recipe.
Oh, you absolutely need to do that. I think it's a winner.
I do too.
It's really easy. You know, the biggest thing, and this is just timing wise, is giving it a little more time for me, because mine's a little mushy, but giving it a little more time to solidify in the fridge. But it's one of those that it gets better a few days later because everything's had time to kind of marry. So this is a really great thing for parties to make in advance. And then all you got to do is bring it out and put it on a platter with some crackers and you're ready to go.
Excellent. Well, that's my kind of recipe. Well, this was so much fun, Laura. Thank you so much for joining me. And I hope you have a Merry Christmas there in North Carolina.
Same to you out on the West Coast. And hopefully, don't know if it'll be 2021, but 2022, we'll have the TCM Festival again and we can all see each other in person.
I am living for that day.
Me too. Take care.
Thank you so much. Bye.